So a while ago, I did a stream discussing Project 2025. However, with the overturning of Chevron and the absolute disaster that was the presidential debate, I think it's time I make a full video on it. I am not a lawyer and have deferred to other sources discussing Project 2025 to interpret the language that was confusing or I was unclear of. However, I will still be discussing some of the exact statements or pages from the actual manifesto. On a more positive note, the art on screen is from a Pride event in my server. Thank you so much to all the awesome artists who participated, including those whose work is not shown here. If you'd like to support this channel, please consider checking out my affiliate links in the description or joining my Discord server. I hope everyone had an awesome Pride Month, and let's just get into the video. In simple terms, Project 2025 is a manifesto of sorts, a list of ideologies, goals, and action plans intended to restructure the American government in accordance with conservative values in the event of a 2024 Republican win for president. While to any leftist this is obviously going to sound the alarms, even just on a surface level, it's much more than things like tax cuts or school vouchers. Project 2025 intends to have far-reaching effects from LGBT and other minority rights, the judicial system, environmental protections, healthcare, obviously including abortion, drug regulation, and a plethora of other things. In the opinion of myself and many others, it's a Christian nationalist document, and if implemented will greatly damage the system of checks and balances that's already weak in this country, in order to force Christian ideology into the law and the lives of citizens. This document is absurdly long, and I won't be able to touch on every bad thing in it, but I will be dividing the video into 5 main sections. General ideology, equal rights, specifically in the area of LGBT and race-based laws and rulings, abortion and women's rights, religion, and kind of everything else, mostly environmental and DOJ-related topics. Project 2025 is heavily based around Protestant Christian ideas of morality and beliefs, with varying levels of admittance to this throughout its language. This is most obvious in its claims to ban pornography, abortion, including pills, remove sexual orientation and gender identity as protected classes, focus on nuclear families, and elimination of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, as well as affirmative action. I'm going to read a particular section of the document in order to kind of push this home. Quote, Goal number 3, promoting stable and flourishing married families. Families comprised of a married mother, father, and their children are the foundation of a well-ordered nation and healthy society. Unfortunately, family policies and programs under President Biden's HHS are fraught with the agenda items focusing on, quote, LGBT equity, end quote, subsidizing single motherhood, de-incentivizing work, and penalizing marriage. These policies should be repealed and replaced with policies that support the formation of stable, married, and nuclear families. Working fathers are essential to the well-being and development of their children, but the United States is experiencing a crisis of fatherlessness that is ruining our children's futures. In the overwhelming number of cases, fathers insulate children from physical and sexual abuse, financial difficulty or poverty, incarceration, teen pregnancy, poor education outcomes, high school failure, and the host of behavioral and psychological problems. By contrast, homes with non-related quote-unquote boyfriends present are among the most dangerous place for a child to be. HHS should prioritize married father engagement in its messaging, health, and welfare policies. In the context of current emerging reproductive technologies, HHS policy should never place the desire of adults over the right of the children to be raised by biological fathers and mothers who conceived them. In cases involving biological parents who are found by a court to be unfit because of abuse or neglect, the process of adoption should be speedy, certain, and supported generously by HHS. End quote. Project 2025 also states inclusion of critical race theory could become grounds for expulsion or punishment. It would investigate officials who have supported DEI initiatives and remove advisory councils for race equity. While this is presented as an idea of colorblindness, which is an issue in itself as it neglects to consider the still ever-present effects on POC citizens, especially those of us whose ancestors were victims of colonization or slavery, culminating in a combination of socioeconomic factors from current and historical unequal opportunity, as well as current systematic issues, it's not even just colorblindness. The inclusion of removing advisory boards and penalizing critical race theory shows an inclination towards not only maintaining the facade that racism no longer exists, but an environment in which its discussion or acknowledgement becomes unsafe. Project 2025 also aims to remove the domestic climate policy, Integracy Working Group on the Social Cost of Carbon, Clean Energy Demonstration, the Clean Energy Corps, and the Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights, essentially boiling down the issue of climate change to, if I don't pay attention to it, it's not there. Alongside this, it would also remove protections on various protected animals such as certain wolves, bears, and wild horses, along with removing regulations on energy-conscious appliances and machines. Project 2025 also intends to cut the cost on social services such as SSI, SNAP, and Medicaid, alongside increasing requirements to receive them while also reducing their services. While they claim to care about children, they also intend to remove the entire Department of Education, claiming it's, quote, a convenient one-stop shop for the woke education cartel, end quote. Limiting or removing free school lunch programs, creating more allowance for teens to enter the workforce, including risky or unsafe jobs, and minimizing or removing safety regulations and labeling requirements on baby formula. While it's quite obvious Trump is fond of spreading information proven to be false, the removal of proper regulations on education will greatly decrease the ability to distinguish accurate information from disinformation, an issue that will be made even worse by their promotion of removing the current attempts to combat disinformation online. This is just scratching the surface of all the issues, so I think it's time we move on further to discussion of LGBT and minority rights. Project 2025 makes a direct attack on what it calls gender ideology, and states that the government should, quote, maintain a biblically based social science reinforced definition of marriage and family, end quote. While we'll discuss this deeper in the area of religion later in the video, it's worth noting that another goal of Project 2025 is to have the United States formally recognized as a Christian nation. As such, much of the phrasing throughout the document explicitly defines things through biblical means and uses demonizing language on secular alternatives. Their goal is for the government to only recognize, quote, heterosexual men and women. Same-sex marriage was legalized nationally in 2015, with the Supreme Court ruling on Obergefell versus Hodges. This statement, in combination with Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas's statements about challenging it, present an implication that same-sex marriage is intended to come to an end. There's also language implicative of banning same-sex adoption, as well as financially rewarding folks who proclaim marriages between one man and one woman. Quote, protect faith-based grant recipients from religious liberty violations and maintain a biblically based social science reinforced definition of marriage and family. Social science reports that assess the objective outcomes for children raised in homes aside from a heterosexual intact marriage are clear. All other family forms involve higher levels of instability, parentheses, the average length of a same-sex marriage is half that of heterosexual marriages, in parentheses, financial stress or poverty, and poor behavioral, psychological, or educational outcomes. For the sake of child well-being, programs should affirm that children require and deserve both a loving and nurturing mother and father, and the play and protection of a father. Despite recent congressional bills like the Respect for Marriage Act that redefine marriage to be one union between two individuals, HMRE program grants should be available to faith-based recipients who affirm that marriage is not just between any two adults, but one man and one unrelated woman, end quote. This is atrocious in itself, as it's a massive backstep in social progress whilst explicitly implementing Christian nationalist ideas by forcing citizens, whether they be of another faith, a progressive Christian, or irreligious, to comply with the alt-right brand of evangelical Protestantism. However, it unsurprisingly gets worse. Whilst using language and talking points commonly spewed by conservative Christians and TERFs, even those with references to things that don't actually occur or are widely misunderstood through either intentional misrepresentation or blatant ignorance. There's also a whole section of the document echoing Matt Walsh's "What is a Woman?" and states, in the past, the word gender was used as a polite alternative to the word sex or term biological sex. The left has commanded that the term gender, which used to mean either male or female, to include a spectrum of others who are seeking to alter biological and societal sexual norms, end quote. It also states it would ban sex reassignment for minors, but it's worth noting that minors do not receive SRS to begin with, and most transition for minors is either social, HRT, or hormone blockers, not surgical. It aims to abolish the Gender Policy Council as well, and states as follows. Abolishing the Gender Policy Council would eliminate central promotion of abortion, quote-unquote health services, comprehensive sexual education, quote-unquote education, and the new woke gender ideology, which is a principal tenet of gender-affirming care and sex change surgeries on minors. In addition to eliminating the council, developing new structures and positions will have the dual effect of demonstrating that promoting life and strengthening the family is a priority, while also facilitating more seamless coordination and consistency across the US government, end quote. The document repeatedly uses the phrasing gender ideology and presents educators who are supportive of trans students or trans rights as predatory. It will also attempt to remove the labels of gender identity and sexual orientation in data collection and government language, including statuses as protected classes, to simply sex with the definition of biological sex at birth. This would likely remove an ability for gender marker changes on identifying documents as well. Aside as a trans person here, but this is blatantly stupid, especially for trans people who are far along in their transition. When my sex was female on my ID, it actually caused one person to believe my ID was fake since it didn't match the way I looked. This is stupid. And while of course it's a very minor issue/annoyance for anyone who hasn't had their gender marker change, I could imagine it would make any instance in which you use your ID frustrating, if not outright dangerous, by outing you. While there is more to say about LGBT issues, a lot of it is simply the document reinforcing these ideas, so I'll move on to their problematic perceptions on race. Before describing the document's position on it, I want to dive a little deeper into the issues with colorblindness and the actual goal of it when it comes from this community. The idea of colorblindness when just talking to a random person, like a cashier or the like, is normal. However, the way it's used in political discussions such as this are often done with the implication or outright statement that racism no longer exists, there are no systematic problems involving race, that race does not have a meaningful impact on culture or socioeconomic factors, and that it has no implication on opportunity. Black and Indigenous Americans specifically started at the beginning of this country with a disadvantage, something sort of giving the white colonizers a head start while forcing BIPOC to wait at the starting line as they were killed, enslaved, displaced, etc. This is important to acknowledge as it allowed many white families to establish generational wealth. Not only was this opportunity not available to BIPOC individuals, but it was often achieved through our exploitation. This still impacts the economic status of Black communities, reservations, and BIPOC families. DEI initiatives and affirmative action exist to try and fix that head start given to white folks by presenting assistance to people who had less resources from the start, essentially equaling the playing field, as well as to gain the perspective and knowledge of these issues from people who have personally experienced them. In addition to this, people of color who did not have ancestors that were victims of slavery or colonization are still often families of immigrants, as the US was largely founded by the British. Many people have come from other countries with absolutely nothing and as such also never received that head start that the white colonists did. These ideas and histories are part of critical race theory, and by not only removing its ability to be taught, but also abolishing systems meant to combat these issues, it's not an attempt to place everyone on an equal playing field, but rather to return the advantage to white citizens by ignoring the damage done and refusing to compensate for it. I'll continue to the document for now, but please keep these issues in mind as we discuss it. The document refers to teaching CRT and gender ideology as noxious and states they must be removed from all schools, as it considers it to be creating quote-unquote manufactured extremism. It also states that the governmental approach to civil rights should be one that explicitly rejects CRT and gender ideology. It proclaims that any acknowledgement of race in itself is racist, and while the language used is often ambiguous, the consistent themes throughout the document, as well as past statements from those supporting it, make it quite clear that this is more so based on a belief that attempting to tackle race inequality through assistance and protections of people of color is actually somehow racist against white people. This is supported by the idea that the document repeatedly refers to DEI programs and the teaching of CRT as promoting racism or race-based discrimination, echoing the unfortunately all too common talking points from the alt-right that DEI, affirmative action, and even just cultural representation, including Black actors and characters in media, is actually giving Black folks an advantage while treating white Americans unfairly. Again, this is either ignorant or intentionally dismissive of the fact that these things exist with the intent to put everyone on equal grounds when white Americans got a couple hundred-year head start. It fits nicely with their idea that racism no longer exists as well, as if racism doesn't exist, why would DEI programs or affirmative actions be needed? It just must be because people are racist against white folks. The way race in the document is discussed is implicative that it's actually the left promoting racist ideas and that Project 2025 aims to try and curtail racism. But it's not only important to note what I've discussed in the rest of this section, but that the document not once refers to who they believe CRT or DEI to be racist against. And while it's not explicitly stating they believe it to be against white Americans, it's pretty self-evident to anyone experienced in observing these types of beliefs or even knows people who hold them personally. I'll be moving on to section 3 for now, that being abortion and women's rights, so here we go. Unsurprisingly, the document is vehemently anti-abortion and is supported by a collection of politicians and organizations that either supported or participated in the overturning of Roe v. Wade, the case that legalized abortion nationally. Many people believe that due to the conservative Supreme Court connections to Project 2025, that the decision and attempt to overturn Roe was one made in preparation of the things discussed in the document. While I can't necessarily confirm if this is true or not, it's unfortunately true that regardless of intention, the overturning of Roe will create a much greater possibility for these plans and ideas to actually be implemented and be implemented quicker. The document states as follows. Conservatives should greatly celebrate the greatest pro-family win in a generation, the overturning of Roe v. Wade, a decision that for 5 decades made a mockery of our Constitution and facilitated the deaths of tens of millions of unborn children. But the Dobbs decision is just the beginning. Conservatives in the states and in Washington, including in the next conservative administration, should push as hard as possible to protect the unborn in every jurisdiction in America. In particular, the next conservative president should work with Congress to enact the most robust protections for the unborn that Congress will support while deploying existing federal powers to protect the innocent life and vigorously comply with the statutory bans on the federal funding of abortion. Conservatives should ardently pursue these pro-life and pro-family policies while recognizing that many women who find themselves in immensely difficult and often tragic situations and the heroism of every choice to become a mother. Alternative options to abortion, especially adoption, should receive federal and state support. In summary, the next president has a moral responsibility to lead the nation in restoring a culture of life in America again." End quote. This is pretty explicitly in support of the claim I made previously and implies outright federal abortion bans. While I don't think adoption will ever be an appropriate alternative to abortion in any case in which abortion is desired, as for one, many abortions are performed due to health risks to either the mother or the child, the fact that no one should be forced to have their body used as life support for 9 months, and the fact that even in successful adoption stories, the process can often be more traumatic than abortion, especially for the children themselves. It's also worth noting that while the document states it would improve the process of adoption and implicitly the foster care system, this has historically not been the case in either individual beliefs nor legislative action. This is also supported by the repeated discussion and promotion of cutting or entirely removing social services, something that would greatly be impactful to families who may have otherwise aborted due to financial strain, who may experience medical issues as a result of forced pregnancy, and foster families who may receive less financial and therapeutic support. It's essentially flowery language that lacks the real action plans that are so thoroughly detailed when discussing how they plan to fuck over trans people or educators. The document also states that the government should, quote, focus on core security, economic, and human rights rather than impose radical abortion and pro-LGBT initiatives. Divisive symbols such as the rainbow flag or Black Lives Matter flag have no place next to the stars and stripes at our embassies, end quote. It not only states that the government should not promote or fund abortion within the country, but that they should stop supporting multinational organizations or programs that promote abortion, including aid to work in impoverished and war-torn countries. It would also remove any governmental language or classification that refers to abortion as reproductive health care or sexual health and wellness education. Even worse, they aim to remove the FDA approval of abortion pills, making them illegal nationwide. This would be massively impactful, as chemical abortions account for 63% of abortions nationwide and are often the most available to those living in states with abortion bans or heavy regulation, as well as being the least invasive method. It states their approval was political from the start and as such illegal, disregarding the lengthy process required for drugs to receive FDA approval and the wider health implications of a decision to remove their production and usage. Ultimately, the goal is to not only eliminate abortion, including chemical abortions, but to demonize it throughout education and multinational affairs. While they claim to want to fix the adoption system, this would not only not solve any of the issues created by a federal abortion ban, but it's also not really supported by their previous statements and historical actions. I'll be moving on to religion, and oh boy, here we go. For anyone new to my channel, this is why I'm an anti-theist. No need to go watch the Why Am I an Anti-Theist video, cause this is, well, a real life fucking example. While I usually try to keep my content on religion accessible to religious folks by being empathetic and attempting to understand their perspectives, I will not be discussing Project 2025's religious ideas, views, or plans in a way that is meant to be sympathetic to them, considering everything we've discussed and will continue to. If you're a Christian who does not agree with the things that Project 2025 claims or says, these statements are not directed at you. The claim that Project 2025 is a Christian nationalist document is not an unfounded one. The document repeatedly uses the adjective biblical when discussing how it would redefine certain government ideas or phrasing, such as the biblical ideas of marriage or gender. While it's also a bit unusual, they neglect to mention religious motivations where they're clearly present, such as banning of pornography or abortion. It has no problem referring to its motivations to revoke LGBT rights, legally forcing the idea of nuclear families, or addressing things it deems as cultural issues through an explicitly Christian and quote-unquote biblical lens. The document complains about churches being shut down during the pandemic, asking the question, quote, how much risk mitigation is worth the price of shutting down churches on the holiest day of a Christian's calendar and far beyond, as it happened in 2020? What is the proper balance of lives saved versus souls saved, end quote. This is frankly ridiculous. Not all Americans believe in souls, or believe in their specific brand of souls. No American should be forced to have their health and safety put in danger because the literal government thinks it should be able to prioritize quote-unquote saving souls over COVID protections. It also sides with the idea that businesses should be allowed to discriminate against LGBT individuals on the basis of Christian-specific religion, giving a hypothetical example of a Christian website designer being forced to make a pride website, or the real-life example of the Colorado baker who refused to make a gay couple a wedding cake. Evidently, these same religious protections would not be provided to those of other faiths or beliefs. Something made clear by the demolition of the Baphomet statue meant to protest the Ten Commandments statue, with the Satanic Temple attempting to place the Baphomet statue to expose the hypocrisy in these types of laws, something that they succeeded at. Alongside this, as we could clearly see in other areas of the document I discussed before, it bases its views on LGBT rights from an explicitly and admittedly biblical perspective. I will make a quick note here as well that while I'm not exactly Christianity's #1 fan, there's actually very minimal theological support for homophobia, as reference to homosexuality in the Bible is as recent as 80 years ago. Regardless of the theological legitimacy of homophobia, however, it's absolutely Christian nationalist to enforce biblical ideas in law, and even more so egregious to do it so unabashedly. The document even refers to protecting the First Amendment rights, but in such a state of either stupidity akin to a moth flying into a lamp 6 times, or the belief that its readers hold that level of ignorance. If you're unaware, the First Amendment is what protects freedom of religion, stating that Congress shall make no such law respecting an establishment of a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Freedom of religion legally equates to the government is not involved in religion of its citizens in any capacity. It will not fund it, nor will it impede religious institutions or individual beliefs. This also implicates the idea that freedom of religion includes freedom from religion. Basically, the government stays the fuck out of it. However, the phrasing throughout the document explicitly states that it's pushing not only Christian moral values, but a specific flavor of Protestant evangelicalism on its citizens through revoking rights on their basis, redefining words in both law and statistic collections and on biblical grounds, and placing the goals of the government as a whole in a position where they should be informed by this specific brand of Christian theology. Even in areas where I stated there are clear religious motivations that are not acknowledged, this is true, such as banning of pornography and deregulation of education. This would allow for creationism to be taught in public schools, something that's been a decades-long argument with various public schools fighting that they should not be required to teach the scientifically sound and evidence-based theory of evolution, but be allowed to teach Christian creationism. Project 2025 aims to reclassify US law through a Christian lens and force their beliefs onto its citizens. It allows for unchecked religious beliefs in such a way that not only may they be forced by the government, but allows individual citizens to force them on others to an even greater extreme than we currently experience. I'll be moving on to the last section, which is kind of miscellaneous. Honestly, I'm just gonna list these things because we're kind of getting long, so oh boy, here we go. Greatly reduce the Endangered Species Act, or even entirely remove it. Remove or reduce regulations on fuel usage and production. Basically deny climate change is happening and as such disband a plethora of agencies and policies meant to slow or prevent it. Make immigration significantly more difficult even through legal routes, including for people seeking asylum and refugees. Explicitly pro-fossil fuel, leave the Paris Climate Agreement, again. Remove the phrase gender identity, gender equality/equity, gender diverse individuals, and gender sensitivity from government websites. Remove any reference to abortion as reproductive healthcare or sexual healthcare from government websites and language. Claim the left has an outright bias against men. Set aside $50 million a year for Christian faith-based grants to both citizens and internationally. States that quote-unquote gender ideology and abortion are against quote-unquote traditional societies. Increase said collaboration with Christian-based organizations, specifically in reference to mission trips. Quote-unquote leverage foreign aid to unleash the power of the American private sector. War profiteering. Abolish the entire Department of Education and counter communism, and the list goes on. To kinda end the video, if you're one of those people who thinks that this isn't going to happen, it already is happening. This is why Roe v. Wade was overturned and why Chevron was overturned. These things allow for this to be possible. In regards to Christian nationalism, we already kind of have that. The government favors Christians over other faiths or irreligious people. And tax the church, please. Even if it doesn't happen within this presidency, we can see the damage from the Supreme Court being stacked by people like Trump, even with a Democrat president. So many moderate leftists, or just moderates in general, or Democrats, actual liberals, neoliberals, are not taking this seriously. And it's them saying it outright that they're gonna do it, and it's signed by every major conservative organization and a lot of individual politicians. It is justified to be scared and even more justified to be angered by this. I completely understand why some people may be talking about detransitioning, going back in the closet, even pretending to be a part of a religion they're not, or keeping their leftist views to themselves because of this, because it's scary. And I've seen a lot of people online saying that they're going to do as such. And I want to make it clear that I don't judge anyone for doing that. I understand that we all have different living situations in which it may be safer for some people and not for others. And that some of us, it may be safe, but it's dangerous for everyone, and some people just aren't willing to take that risk, and that's fine. But if you do have an inclination to not do those things, to not leave the country if you're able to stay and fight it, to not detransition, and you know what, I'm usually not an advocate for DIY HRT, but this makes it seem like it's going to be even more necessary than it is now, so use DIY HRT to be openly trans, to be openly gay, to be openly an atheist or a Jew or a Buddhist or a Muslim or whatever the fuck that's not Christian. Do that. I'm going to do that. I'm not going to shut up. I'm not going to stop talking about it. I'm not going to stop talking about it in real life or online. And while I may be too disabled to be the one to throw the first brick if it's necessary, I will certainly be there to throw the second. This is a pathway to Handmaid's Tale. That's what it is. And like I said, I place no judgment on people who take less favorable actions like leaving the country or detransitioning to protect themselves. Again, I understand that not everyone is in a position or is willing to take the risk to put themselves in danger to fight these things. But again, if you're even considering it, I implore you to consider it a little harder. This country is fucked, man. It was already fucked up and now it's more fucked. So that's all I got today. Thanks for watching, guys. Ha det.